There's a particular kind of confusion that follows a relationship with a narcissistic or antagonistic person, and it's different from the confusion that follows other kinds of relational pain. It's the confusion of not being able to fully explain what happened. Of knowing something was deeply wrong but struggling to put words to it in a way that doesn't sound like you're overreacting. Of having people in your life, good, caring people, who didn't see what you saw, because what was done to you was often done quietly, deniably, in the spaces between moments that looked fine from the outside. It's the confusion of missing someone who hurt you. Of feeling relieved to be out and devastated to be out at the same time. Of questioning whether you're the problem, because you were told, repeatedly, in ways both overt and subtle, that you were. And it's the confusion of trying to heal from something that doesn't have a clean beginning and end, something that rewired your nervous system and your sense of reality gradually, over months or years, in ways you're still discovering. This video is about that. It's about naming what happened clearly and without flinching, understanding why it causes the specific harm it does, and talking honestly about what recovery, real recovery, not just time passing, actually looks like. The framework we're drawing on is largely rooted in the work of Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist and one of the most important voices in the field of narcissistic abuse education. Her work, along with the broader psychological research on coercive control, trauma bonding, and complex trauma, forms the backbone of what we're covering today. If you're a survivor, I want you to know this video sees you. And if you're a clinician, there's a clinical layer throughout, including a 24-resource recovery bundle linked in the description designed for use both with clients and independently. Let's start by naming what we're actually talking about. Section 1. What is narcissistic abuse? Narcissistic abuse is a pattern of behavior, not a single incident, not a bad day, not a relationship that simply went wrong, but a sustained, pattern dynamic in which one person systematically prioritizes their own needs, validation, and control at the profound expense of another person's sense of self, safety, and reality. It can occur in romantic relationships, family systems, friendships, and workplaces. It can be perpetrated by someone with narcissistic personality disorder, though a formal diagnosis is neither required nor often available. What matters clinically and personally is the pattern of behavior and the impact it produces. Dr. Ramani uses the term antagonistic to describe a broader category that includes not just the classically grandiose narcissist but also the covert or vulnerable narcissist, the communal narcissist, and other personality styles characterized by a chronic lack of empathy, a need for control and admiration, and a pattern of interpersonal behavior that consistently harms others while insulating the perpetrator from accountability. The key behaviors in narcissistic abuse include gaslighting, the systematic undermining of another person's perception of reality, making them question what they saw, heard, felt, or experienced. It includes emotional manipulation, intermittent reinforcement, devaluation and criticism, boundary violations, and the use of triangulation, bringing in a third party, real or implied, to create jealousy, insecurity, or competition. It includes love bombing in the early stages, an overwhelming, intoxicating period of idealization and attention that creates a powerful attachment before the dynamic shifts. And it includes the weaponization of vulnerability, the use of things a person has shared in trust as ammunition in later conflict. What makes narcissistic abuse particularly difficult to name and recover from is its inconsistency. It is not constant cruelty. If it were, leaving would be far simpler. It is a cycle. And understanding that cycle is one of the most important things a survivor can do. Section 2. The cycle of abuse. The narcissistic cycle of abuse follows a recognizable pattern, one that repeats across the arc of the relationship in ways that can take months or years to see clearly. Understanding the cycle doesn't mean the relationship was your fault. It means you can finally understand why it felt so impossible to leave and so impossible to stay. The cycle typically begins with idealization, what Dr. Ramani and others call love bombing. This is the phase that created the attachment in the first place. The narcissistic or antagonistic partner is attentive, charming, intensely focused on you, making you feel seen and chosen in a way that may have felt more vivid than anything you'd experienced before. This phase is not fabricated in the sense that the person has consciously planned it. But it is the phase in which they are most invested in winning you, and it does not reflect the stable reality of the relationship. The second phase is devaluation. As the relationship deepens and the initial conquest is secured, the idealization begins to erode. Criticism emerges, at first subtle, perhaps framed as concern or humor, then more direct. The very qualities that were praised in the idealization phase become liabilities. You find yourself working harder to get back to how things felt at the beginning, walking on eggshells, modifying your behavior trying to avoid triggering the anger or withdrawal, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, reorganizing your life around the regulation of your partner's emotional state. The third phase is discard, which can be dramatic and final, or quiet and incremental, or a chronic hovering threat that is never fully carried out. The narcissistic partner withdraws attention, affection, and investment, either replacing it with contempt and coldness, or simply disappearing emotionally while remaining physically present. Discard is often devastating not because the relationship was good, but because of the trauma bond that has formed over the course of the cycle. And then, critically, the cycle often returns to idealization. Hoovering, as it is sometimes called, the re-idealization of the target after a discard or conflict, the return of charm and attention and the promise of the relationship that first created the attachment. This is the phase that makes leaving so extraordinarily difficult. Because the person who returns in the hoovering phase genuinely resembles the person from the beginning, and the nervous system that was conditioned during idealization responds accordingly. The Narcissistic Cycle of Abuse worksheet in the Recovery Bundle maps this pattern in detail, because seeing it laid out clearly is often one of the first genuinely organizing experiences survivors have. When you can see the cycle, you can stop interpreting each phase as an isolated event and start seeing the pattern for what it is. Section 3. Why these relationships are so hard to leave. One of the most important things to understand about narcissistic and antagonistic relationships, and one of the most important things clinicians can communicate to the survivors they work with, is that the difficulty of leaving is not a character flaw. It is the predictable outcome of specific psychological mechanisms that these relationships reliably produce. Trauma bonding is the most fundamental of these. Trauma bonding, sometimes called betrayal bonding, occurs in relationships characterized by intermittent reinforcement, the alternation of harm and affection, punishment and reward, cruelty and tenderness. The neurobiological research on intermittent reinforcement is clear. It produces a stronger and more persistent behavioral attachment than consistent positive reinforcement does. The unpredictability of the relationship doesn't weaken the bond. It strengthens it. The nervous system becomes organized around the anticipation of the reward, the return of the idealized partner, in a way that is functionally similar to addiction. Cognitive dissonance plays a significant role as well. The person you are trying to leave is also the person who made you feel more seen and chosen than anyone ever had during the idealization phase. Holding both of those realities simultaneously, this person harmed me and this person is the source of my deepest attachment, produces a level of psychological tension that the mind works constantly to resolve, often by minimizing the harm, excusing the behavior, or returning to the relationship to escape the dissonance. Karpman's drama triangle is a framework that helps illuminate the relational dynamics at play. In the triangle, roles cycle between victim, persecutor, and rescuer, and in relationships with narcissistic dynamics, the survivor often finds themselves moving through all three positions across the course of a single conflict cycle. The rescuer role in particular, the impulse to understand, explain, forgive, and rehabilitate the harmful partner, is one of the most powerful forces keeping survivors in the relationship. The Drama Triangle worksheet in the Recovery Bundle helps survivors map these dynamics and recognize the role shifts that keep them locked in the cycle. And identity erosion must be named here too. By the time many survivors are ready to leave, they have spent months or years having their perceptions questioned, their needs dismissed, their self-concept shaped by the distorted mirror of an antagonistic partner's gaze. The person attempting to leave is often doing so from a place of profound self-doubt and diminished self-trust, which is precisely what the relationship produced. Leaving requires trusting your own perception of reality, which is exactly what gaslighting dismantles. Section 4, The 8 Signs of Narcissistic Trauma, 10 o'clock to 12:30. The impact of narcissistic abuse on the psychological and physiological system is documented, specific, and in many ways distinct from the trauma produced by other forms of relational harm. The Recovery Bundle includes a resource specifically focused on the 8 signs of narcissistic trauma, and walking through these is important because many survivors have never had their experience validated in clinical terms. The first is hypervigilance, a chronic, exhausting state of heightened alertness to the moods, reactions, and behavior of others. The nervous system that lived in an antagonistic relationship has been conditioned to scan constantly for threat. Long after the relationship ends, the body continues to operate in survival mode, reading every room, monitoring every interaction for the early signs of danger. The second is a profound disruption of self-trust. Survivors of narcissistic abuse frequently describe an inability to trust their own judgment, perceptions, or decisions, the direct legacy of sustained gaslighting. When someone has spent months or years being told that what they saw wasn't real, what they felt wasn't valid, and what they remembered didn't happen, the internal compass becomes unreliable in ways that extend far beyond the relationship itself. Third is shame, not guilt about specific behaviors, but deep, pervasive shame about the self. The internalized message of an antagonistic relationship is often, "You are too much, not enough, defective, lucky anyone wants you at all." This message, repeated explicitly and implicitly over time, becomes part of the survivor's self-concept in ways that outlast the relationship by years. Fourth is difficulty with trust in subsequent relationships. Survivors often find themselves either hypervigilant for red flags in new connections, reading threat into ordinary behavior, or swinging toward idealizing new partners, drawn to the familiar emotional intensity of an attachment style that was forged in an antagonistic dynamic. Fifth is a disrupted sense of identity. Who am I when I'm not managing someone else's reality? What do I like, want, believe, value, separate from the relationship that consumed so much of my cognitive and emotional bandwidth? This identity confusion is not weakness. It is the natural result of years of self-abandonment under relational duress. Sixth is a characteristic confusion and ambivalence that can look from the outside like an inability to move on, but is actually the cognitive and emotional residue of cognitive dissonance, trauma bonding, and the oscillating nature of the cycle of abuse. The grief of these relationships is genuinely complicated. Seventh is somatic symptoms, the body holding what the mind is still processing. Chronic fatigue, digestive disruption, sleep disturbance, heightened startle response, tension patterns, and immune dysregulation are all documented sequelae of chronic relational trauma. The nervous system has been dysregulated for a long time. It takes time and intentional intervention to come home. And eighth is a collapse of what researchers call the assumptive world, the foundational beliefs about safety, fairness, and the predictability of close relationships that most people carry without examining them. Narcissistic abuse, particularly when it occurs in formative relationships, dismantles the assumption that people who say they love you will not deliberately harm you. Rebuilding that foundation is some of the deepest work in recovery. Section 5, The Iceberg, What's Really Driving the Behavior? One of the most freeing and also most disorienting realizations for survivors of narcissistic abuse is understanding what is actually underneath the behavior of the antagonistic person in their life. The Narcissist Iceberg worksheet in the Recovery Bundle is a visual tool for this, and the metaphor is exactly right. What is visible above the surface, the grandiosity, the charm, the entitlement, the contempt, the need for admiration, is real and it causes real harm. But it is not the totality of what is happening. Below the surface, the research and clinical literature consistently describe profound fragility, a self-structure built on a foundation of deep shame and inadequacy, defended against with extraordinary tenacity. Dr. Ramani is careful and consistent on this point. Understanding what is beneath the behavior does not excuse it. Insight into the wound does not obligate the wounded person to absorb the harm. Many people carry profound pain without becoming harmful to others. The iceberg framework is not offered as exoneration. It is offered as context that allows survivors to stop taking the behavior personally, to stop asking what is wrong with me that caused this, and to start understanding that the dynamic was about the antagonistic person's internal architecture far more than it was ever about them. This matters enormously for recovery. Because one of the most persistent obstacles to healing from narcissistic abuse is the belief, carefully cultivated by the relationship, that if the survivor had just been better, smarter, more loving, less emotional, less needy, less themselves, the relationship would have been different. The iceberg tells a different story. The iceberg says, this was not about your adequacy. It was about their defenses. Section 6, The Non-Linear Road to Recovery, 1430 to 1700. Recovery from narcissistic abuse is not a straight line, and it is not a quick one. This is important to say directly, because the cultural expectation that healing should follow a tidy arc, grief, acceptance, moving on, is itself a source of shame for survivors who find themselves circling back, re-grieving, occasionally almost being pulled back into contact, and wondering why they aren't further along. Dr. Ramani describes narcissistic abuse recovery as involving several overlapping processes, none of which complete neatly before the next one begins. There is the grieving of the relationship as it actually was. There is the separate and often longer grieving of the relationship as it was imagined to be, the idealized version that love bombing created and the intermittent reinforcement kept alive. There is the painstaking work of rebuilding self-trust. There is the identity reconstruction. And there is neurobiological work of regulating a nervous system that has been in chronic threat response for months or years. The recovery bundle acknowledges this non-linearity explicitly. The resources inside are not designed to be worked through sequentially from start to finish, they are designed to meet you where you are. The journal prompts for narcissistic abuse recovery and the self-esteem building journal prompts support the reflective, meaning-making work. The daily self-care check-in and daily self-care planner support the foundational daily regulation that makes everything else possible. The wellness wheel offers a 360-degree view of where a person's life has contracted under the weight of the relationship, and where attention needs to go. The 25-day self-confidence challenge and the 6 pillars of self-esteem support the slow, intentional work of rebuilding a self-concept that the relationship systematically dismantled. Radical acceptance, the dialectical behavior therapy skill of fully accepting reality as it is without requiring it to be different before you can move forward, is one of the most clinically powerful tools in narcissistic abuse recovery. Not because it means condoning what happened, but because resistance to reality, the desperate wish that the relationship had been different, that the person were capable of being who they presented themselves as in the beginning, is one of the primary ways survivors remain emotionally tethered to something that is over. Practicing radical acceptance is one of the resources in the bundle because it is that central to the process. And the journey towards secure attachment, understanding one's own attachment patterns, how they were activated and exploited in the antagonistic relationship, and what healthy connection actually feels like, is the longer arc that runs beneath all of the other recovery work. The recovery bundle includes a worksheet on this specifically because attachment work is not incidental to narcissistic abuse recovery. It is at the heart of it. Section 7, Tools for Healing, Boundaries, Self-Esteem, and Regulation. The final section of this video is about the tools, the specific, concrete practices that support healing not as abstraction but as a daily lived reality. Boundary work is foundational. Survivors of narcissistic abuse have typically had their boundaries systematically violated, minimized, and mocked over the course of the relationship, which means that even understanding what a boundary is, let alone holding one, can feel unfamiliar and anxiety-provoking. The recovery bundle includes a full resource on the 6 types of boundaries: physical, emotional, intellectual, time, sexual, and material, with specific reflection prompts for each type to help survivors identify where their boundaries were violated and what they want to establish going forward. Boundaries are not walls. They are the definition of where you end and someone else begins, and reclaiming them is a profound act of self-respect. Identifying and meeting your own needs is closely related, and for many survivors, equally unfamiliar. Years of orienting toward an antagonistic partner's needs, moods, and demands can leave a person profoundly disconnected from their own. The worksheet on identifying and meeting your own needs creates space to ask, often for the first time in a long time, what do I actually need? Not what do they need from me, what do I need? Somatic regulation is non-negotiable in narcissistic abuse recovery because the harm lives in the body. The 5 somatic techniques for soothing the nervous system and the 7 grounding techniques in the bundle are not supplementary tools, they are primary ones. A dysregulated nervous system cannot do the cognitive and reflective work of recovery. Stabilizing the body is the foundation from which everything else becomes possible. The improve the present moment skill from dialectical behavior therapy, imagery, meaning, prayer, relaxation, one thing at a time, vacation, and encouragement, is a distress tolerance tool that is particularly useful in the acute phases of recovery when the pain is most overwhelming and the pull toward contact or rumination is strongest. And the mantras for recovering from narcissistic abuse deserve a specific mention, because language shapes reality, and the language that antagonistic relationships install is corrosive. Mantras are not magic, but deliberately practicing a different internal narrative, one rooted in self-compassion, self-trust, and the truth of who you are beneath the relationship's distortions, is a form of neural repatterning that compounds over time. The full recovery bundle, all 24 resources, is linked in the description. Each tool is designed to be used independently, in combination, by individuals in their own healing, and by therapists with clients who are navigating this work. If you've been in a narcissistic or antagonistic relationship, the most important thing I want to leave you with is this: the confusion, the self-doubt, the grief that doesn't follow any recognizable logic, the part of you that still misses someone who hurt you, none of that means you're broken, weak, or pathetic. It means you were in a relationship designed, whether consciously or not, to produce exactly that outcome. You were not too much. You were not the problem. And the version of yourself that got smaller and quieter and more careful over the years of that relationship, that person is still there. Recovery is the process of going back for them. That process is not linear, it is not fast, and it is best done with support, whether that's a skilled therapist, a community of people who understand, or simply the resources and reflection tools that help you make sense of what happened and who you're becoming on the other side of it. The full Narcissistic Abuse and Antagonistic Relationship Recovery Bundle, 24 worksheets and tools covering everything we talked about today and more, is linked in the description. It was built for this. For you. Share this video with someone who needs to know that what happened to them has a name. And I'll see you in the next one.